First of all, everything that you'll see in this review was a recreation of what I did when I was writing the script, as the gameplay is way too long to record and archive. This was also originally supposed to be my 100th review special, which is why it's a bit longer than the other reviews on the channel, and the reason why I decided to do the review now is because in between me starting the review to now, Gran Turismo 7 was announced, and I think a review of that would be a lot more fitting for the 100th review special. There's that, and a lot of people have been asking for it, so here it is. Gran Turismo 3 A-Spec was the best-selling game on the PlayStation 2, until Grand Theft Auto San Andreas was released. I'm pretty sure that was all down to the graphics and physics, which were amazing, but I thought that it was lacking content, which is something that the Gran Turismo series was known for, as Gran Turismo 2 had over 600 cars, but going from 600 cars down to 180 is a bit of a joke, and I think that is why Sony should have stuck their noses out of the development process and just let Polyphony Digital make Gran Turismo 2000. It wouldn't have looked as good, but it would have had a lot more content, and that would have made the gameplay a lot longer. Reviewers at the time have completely different thoughts about the game, as it got 10s out of 10, and I think that is one of the main reasons why Sony sold 14.89 million copies. But I also think the fact that a lot of PlayStation 2s were bundled with the game in the early 2000s also had something to do with those amazing sales figures. People back then might have thought that Gran Turismo 3 was brilliant, but in the few months since reviewing it, a lot of people have told me in various places on the internet and in real life how much they don't like the game, and I think it's pretty much because Polyphony Digital were told to stop developing GT 2000, which they had already been doing for about a year. In 2003, Sony released Gran Turismo 4 Prologue. This game was a scaled down version of Gran Turismo 4, just to show what the full game was going to be like. Sort of like a demo, but with a lot more content. It only had 50 cars and 6 tracks. Fun fact, at the time of the release of Gran Turismo 4 Prologue, the full game only had 500 cars planned for it. More than 200 less than what the game was released with. Gran Turismo 4 was released on the PlayStation 2 just over a year later in December 2004 in Japan, February 2005 in North America, and March 2005 in Europe. It was also supposed to be released on the PlayStation Portable as well, under the name Gran Turismo for Boys. That name probably wouldn't go down well these days. The PlayStation Portable did get a Gran Turismo game released on it in the end, but 4 years later in 2009. Gran Turismo 4 was delayed by a year and a half due to technical difficulties that Polyphony Digital had with the PlayStation 2. I reckon Gran Turismo 4 used almost all of the PlayStation 2's power, just like what Gran Turismo 2 did with the original PlayStation. Because of this, I think the PlayStation 2 probably never lived up to Kazunori Yamauchi's expectations. He originally wanted to make a Gran Turismo on the PlayStation 2 with more than 6 cars in a race, visible damage, and an interior view, which I think is the reason why a whole new physics engine was created for Gran Turismo 4 instead of just using the one from Gran Turismo 3. Kazunori also said that he wanted to give the AI more emotion and react to what you do on the track. I will talk more about that in a bit. You begin the game with 10,000 credits, which is 8,000 less than what you got in the third game, but you can buy a cheap car as the used car dealerships are back. In fact, there are 3 of them. The best car that I could get was a 1989 Nissan Skyline GTS, but if you have a Gran Turismo 3 save file, then you can transfer up to 100,000 credits. If you are really good at the game, then you only need to buy a pickup truck to begin with for one of the beginner races, as you get cars for completing the license tests, and then you can use that 100,000 credits to upgrade those cars. Just like the previous 3 games, you do need to acquire licenses to be able to complete 100% of the game. And if you see my reviews of Gran Turismo 1, 2 and 3, then you'll know exactly how I feel about that aspect of the series. Gran Turismo 4 is a little bit worse than those games when it comes to license tests, as there are way too many of them. In Gran Turismo 3 you had 8 tests per license. I think that is the perfect amount, but in Gran Turismo 4 you have 16. Even though in a perfect world, that is 16 too many. In the middle of the license tests, you have something called a coffee break. The coffee break is a more relaxed test, where there is no time limit for bronze, so you can take as long as you want and still pass. I think the coffee break is just a waste of time, and if I wanted a break from the licenses, then I'll just take a break from the game in general. As I just stated, I did the license tests before doing any races, just so I could win the prize cars. The license tests are easy to pass, but if you want to get gold on all of them, then it does get a lot harder. I managed to do that whilst writing the draft of this review script, but haven't been able to ever since. Once you've got the licenses, then you can start racing. Well, you can do some races before you get the licenses, but it's a good idea to get those over and done with as soon as possible. There are a lot of events in this game, and it will take you many hours to get through them all. So you've got the beginner, professional, extreme and the one make events near the beginning of the game, which aren't that hard, especially if you pick the right car. And then you have the rest of the game, which is a little bit harder, but not too hard. And in a lot of cases, you don't need to upgrade your car at all to win easily. Now I did that to get through the game as quickly as possible, because the quicker I get through the game, the less footage I need. The one annoying thing about the racing is that you have to do the 24-hour races all at once, which means leaving the PlayStation 2 on for between 24 hours if you're a bit mental and do the whole race at once, or 38 hours if you get 8 hours sleep and follow the health guidelines set by Polyphony. Overall, I think the racing in Gran Turismo 4 is the best in the series. But what isn't the best in the series is the AI. The AI aren't really that good. They can drive, and in some cases they are hard to beat, but they just follow the driving line that you can't see. They only recognise each other on the track and will hit you if you get in their way, which in real life they would get a penalty for that, but in the special conditions events, you get the penalty. I think this is one of those things where it's because of the PlayStation 2's lack of power. As I've already said, Polyphony Digital's director wanted to give the AI more emotion and react to what you do on the track, but because the PlayStation 2 was pretty much at its limit, that wasn't possible. That could have been possible if there were less cars on the track. There are over 50 tracks in the game. In the previous Gran Turismo games, the tracks were put into 2 categories, road and dirt. Well, not officially, but the way that you selected the tracks showed that they were in different categories. But in Gran Turismo 4, there are 5 categories: original, city, world, dirt and snow, and driving park. But driving park tracks are classed as original in arcade mode. A lot of the tracks were introduced into the series in Gran Turismo 4, such as the Nürburgring and Suzuka. We've also got tracks that return from Gran Turismo 3 like Tokyo R246 and Laguna Seca. A lot more tracks from the PlayStation 1 games such as the High Speed Ring return as well, but quite a few tracks from Gran Turismo 3 are missing, like Complex String and Smoky Mountain. I was going to say that the tracks still look modern, but Gran Turismo 7 has kind of changed things up a bit, but they do look as good as the tracks in Gran Turismo 6, a game that was released 8 years after in a newer console generation. Gran Turismo 4 has 721 cars from 80 manufacturers, and as of writing this script, the car list in this game is still the 4th biggest of any game, even after 15 years of its release, being behind Forza Motorsport 7, Gran Turismo 5 and Gran Turismo 6. You've also got to remember that this was before DLC was a mainstream thing, and unlike Gran Turismo 5 and 6, every car model was made for this game instead of being carried over from older generation consoles. Gran Turismo 4 has the widest variety of cars whilst keeping the quality consistent. So you've got K cars such as the Daihatsu Seor/Mira TR XX Avanzato R and the Honda Today G, to supercars like the Mercedes McLaren SLR, Czeta V16T and the Pagani Zonda, with everything else in between. What I really like about the car list is that you get car manufacturers that aren't that well known outside of their countries of origin, such as Hommel, Czeta, Marcos and Tommy Kira. Another thing that I like about the car list is that Polyphony Digital didn't overdo it with tuners, which is something that other developers were doing at around the same time, such as Turn 10 Studios with Forza Motorsport 1 and 2. Even though there are just over 80 manufacturers, there are a lot of notable ones missing, such as Ferrari, Lamborghini and Bugatti. Porsche is also missing from the game thanks to EA, but they got around that by including Roof. I read years ago that at the time, if a manufacturer didn't agree to having their cars in the game for free, then Sony wouldn't negotiate. That might not be true, but it would explain why those manufacturers appeared in other racing games, such as Forza Motorsport, Sega GT 2002/Online, and Test Drive Unlimited. It would also explain why a lot of non-Japanese cars in Gran Turismo 4 were either brand new, in 2005, or vintage. What I mean by that is that at the time, manufacturers were starting to see the advertising opportunities by having their cars in a game. I think bikes were supposed to be added into the series, starting with Gran Turismo 4, and this is going to need some explaining. Polyphony Digital made a bike game called Tourist Trophy, which was released a year after Gran Turismo 4. There is so much content in that game that it would have taken over a year to develop. So Polyphony Digital must have been working on that at the same time as Gran Turismo 4, which would have been a stupid thing to do as Gran Turismo 4 was a well-known game, whilst Tourist Trophy wasn't, and most of their time would have gone towards Gran Turismo 4's development. So I think Tourist Trophy is just the extra bits that they couldn't include into Gran Turismo 4. To further back up my theory, Tourist Trophy runs on a modified version of Gran Turismo 4's physics engine, instead of having its own. So Gran Turismo 4's physics engine must have been coded with bikes in mind. As I've already stated, Gran Turismo 4 probably used up almost all of the PlayStation 2's power, and having something that requires completely different physics would have meant either lowering the frame rate or graphics. Not saying that is what happened, but I do think that is a plausible theory. As I've mentioned a lot in this review, you can tune your car. The tuning is the same as it's always been, so I'm not going to go into too much detail there, but Polyphony Digital did add the ability to install NOS, which does make a huge difference in races as you can use it to give you a little bit extra power at the beginning of a race to overtake the AI. I can't believe it took them that long to put NOS into the game. I think the game doesn't give you enough power when it comes to Stage 5 turbos, but other than that, the car upgrading is good, but the customization isn't. Other racing games in 2005 such as Forza Motorsport and Need for Speed Most Wanted allowed the player to install body kits and decals. You can't do any of that in Gran Turismo 4. The only thing that you can do in terms of visual customization is install a spoiler and new wheels. Overall, I'm going to give Gran Turismo 4 an 8 out of 10. There aren't that many games where I can restart straight after completing, because there are so many ways that you can play the game. Gran Turismo 4 looks brilliant, has amazing physics, and also has a lot of content. There are a few things that I don't like about the game. The main thing that I don't like is the lack of supercar manufacturers such as Ferrari, Bugatti and Lamborghini. I think that is something that could have been resolved if Sony were fine with paying some kind of license to include those manufacturers. That is something that other racing games such as Forza Motorsport, Need for Speed Most Wanted, and even Enthusia Professional Racing did better. Another thing that I don't like about Gran Turismo 4 is that there are way too many license tests. I was fine with doing 8 in Gran Turismo 3, but 16 is a bit much. I get that they were trying to make the gameplay longer, but that really wasn't the way to do it. The one last thing that I want to say, which I couldn't fit into any other part of the review, is that Gran Turismo 4 was the first game ever to have a photo mode, something that every racing game has these days. I am going to recommend Gran Turismo 4. It's not the best Gran Turismo, I still think Gran Turismo 2 is, but it is the best on the PlayStation 2, and is a little bit better than Gran Turismo 5 and 6 in a lot of ways. This has been my review of Gran Turismo 4 on the PlayStation 2. The next review that I'm going to be doing is of Colin McRae Dirt on the Xbox 360. If you like this review, then please give it a like. If you didn't, then give it a dislike. And if you want to see more, then please consider subscribing and joining the Discord server linked in the description. Goodbye.